If it were not for a compelling reason, Jiang Qin would not have actively sought out Zhu Zhilin. Her son, Yangyang's school, was going to host a parent-child chess competition. Jiang Qin had initially agreed to participate and had done a lot of preparation with her son. But then, she unexpectedly received a last-minute business trip assignment, an important one that she couldn't take time off from. Jiang Qin wanted her son to withdraw from the competition, but he protested, saying he had prepared so hard, and if she made him withdraw, he might as well drop out of school. Jiang Qin hadn't expected her son to use dropping out as leverage and was left stunned. She was a determined and strong-willed person herself, but her son's determination surprised her. Jiang Qin said, "How about this, I'll call your aunt and ask her to accompany you in the competition instead." Her son blurted out, "I'd rather have my dad do it." Jiang Qin was taken aback. She hadn't expected her son to mention his father. Back when they got divorced, her son used to mention Zhu Zhilin quite often. Once, he even suddenly questioned Jiang Qin, "There's something called visitation rights in the law, did you eat them?" Her son was mature beyond his years and often spoke in a sophisticated manner, making people unable to suppress their amusement. But this time, Jiang Qin didn't laugh, she lied, just as her son had guessed. She had indeed deprived Zhu Zhilin of his visitation rights. She resented Zhu Zhilin for his infidelity and denied him access to their child. Jiang Qin had once told Zhu Zhilin, "Our son can live perfectly well without your visitation. If one day he misses you, I will let you know. However, since you left, he has never mentioned you." She also said, "If you insist on visitation rights, then I will be honest with our son and tell him that it was your infidelity that led to the divorce, that you betrayed our family. You were the one who didn't want this family." Zhu Zhilin was speechless, contemplating for a long time before saying, "All right, I promise you. From now on, I'll leave our son to you." So, Zhu Zhilin had never seen his son, not even by chance. After their divorce, their old house went to Jiang Qin, and Zhu Zhilin moved to his parents' house in the suburbs, far from each other. Zhu Zhilin was self-employed, with his shop located in the east of the city, while Jiang Qin's workplace and their son's school were in the west. But after their son questioned her about visitation rights, Jiang Qin had second thoughts. It was entirely normal for her son to want to see his father. He was innocent, and he longed for that fatherly love. She decided to let them meet. She arranged a time and place with Zhu Zhilin, but she and her son waited a whole day, and Zhu Zhilin never showed up or answered his phone. He stood up their son. Finally, after everyone had left the amusement park, her son gave up, sitting on a wicker chair, his hands entwined, looking crushed. His voice was quiet, like a falling leaf, weak and calm. "Mom, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have doubted you. It's clear that my dad doesn't want to see me. I won't bring this up again. Let's go back." With those words, her son walked away on his own, his small shoulders shrugging, as if he were crying. Watching her son's lonely and forlorn figure, Jiang Qin felt a deep pain in her bones. She wished she could tear Zhu Zhilin into pieces and feed him to the dogs. Since then, her son never mentioned his father again. The days without a father seemed quite peaceful. They had a nanny to take care of him at home, and Jiang Qin would play with her son when she got back from work. On weekends, they watched TV or went to the amusement park, and she made sure to take time off for school activities. She believed that her son had everything other children had, and he didn't need that absent fatherly love. Her son never showed any longing for it again. Life went on smoothly for a few months. But, it was on this day that her son once again brought up his father because of an event that she couldn't attend. His tone was so calm and natural that it seemed as though he wasn't intentionally doing it. However, his casualness was odd, and Jiang Qin sensed his inner turmoil. He could pretend to be calm in his tone, but he couldn't keep the color from draining out of his cheeks. After saying that sentence, his face turned red, and he kept making mistakes while playing with his toys. His mind was clearly elsewhere. Seeing no reaction from Jiang Qin, her son mumbled quietly, "My aunt. No, her chess skills are too bad." Afterward, he stole a quick glance at Jiang Qin and quickly averted his gaze. This small action pricked at Jiang Qin's heart. She pondered and eventually bit the bullet to call Zhu Zhilin, explaining the situation. Zhu Zhilin agreed. On the phone, Jiang Qin didn't bring up the fact that half a year ago, Zhu Zhilin had stood their son up. She didn't want to say too much in front of her son. She just said, "This competition is very important, and our son values it greatly. You know that, right?" Zhu Zhilin understood her meaning and said, "Don't worry, I've got it." If this time Zhu Zhilin could genuinely accompany their son in the parent-child activity and offer some much-needed comfort to their son's wounded heart, then she would consider letting go of her hatred and giving him the visitation rights that should have been his. However, things took another unexpected turn, far beyond Jiang Qin's imagination. Jiang Qin was away on a business trip dealing with clients when she received a call from the nanny. Her son had eaten too much ice cream and seafood, and even consumed chilled beer, leading to severe diarrhea. He had been rushed to the hospital. It turned out that the person who accompanied her son to the parent-child event was not his father, but rather one of his father's former lackeys. Her son had waited at home after breakfast, expecting his father to pick him up. Instead, this man arrived and informed him that his father couldn't make it and asked him to go to the competition with him. Her son was furious, but the man sweet-talked him into agreeing, promising that he would win first place. As it turned out, her son did win first place, but then the man fed him recklessly, causing his stomach to react badly. Jiang Qin's mind was in turmoil as she questioned why the nanny hadn't informed her earlier. The nanny stammered, "Oh, I was going to tell you, but our son's father called me and told me not to tell you. He said he had something important and didn't want me to distract you. He assured me that the person he sent was trustworthy. I thought, he's our son's father, so..." Jiang Qin was furious and "Old the nanny, are you going to listen to him or to me? I'm the one paying your salary, not Zhu Zhilin." The nanny was full of self-blame. "It's all my fault, it's all my fault. I was really upset when our son fell ill, and I couldn't hold back anymore, so I..." Jiang Qin held back her tears. "How is Yangyang now?" "He's much better now. The doctor induced vomiting and gave him N4. He's much improved." Jiang Qin had unfinished business at her trip, but she couldn't wait. She called her company and said there was an urgent family matter that required her presence, and the company should send someone else. The company said that her actions were irresponsible and would directly affect her year-end evaluation, but Jiang Qin couldn't care less and promptly bought a return ticket. When she arrived at the hospital, Jiang Qin saw her son on the bed with N4 from a distance, and her eyes welled up with tears. Since her divorce, Jiang Qin had never been separated from her son even once. The first time they were apart, he ended up in the hospital. How could she not feel heartbroken? However, before she had a chance to talk to her son, the person responsible for her son's hospitalization arrived. He cautiously carried a bowl of porridge and approached Jiang Qin with a grin, saying, "Hey, sister-in-law, weren't you on a business trip?" Jiang Qin wiped away her tears and gave him a cold look, saying, "Who's your sister-in-law? Leave that aside, come with me, I have something to ask you." As they reached the end of the corridor, Jiang Qin launched into a barrage of questions. Why didn't Zhu Zhilin come himself? Is he dead? Or is it because of his wife that he couldn't come? If he couldn't come, why did he agree in the first place? Who does this to their own son? Is he even human? Is there no humanity left in him? Before the man could explain, Jiang Qin continued, choking on her words. What have you done to my son? Why is he suffering from vomiting and diarrhea to the point of needing gastric lavage? He's still so young, and you allowed him to drink beer, let alone ice-cold beer. Do you have no common sense? Did you bring any brains with you? Can you drink ice-cold beverages in this weather? Ice cream and ice-cold beer, what were you thinking? Did you intend to harm my son, or did Zhu Zhilin send you to harm my son? As Jiang Qin became more agitated and her words turned incoherent, she couldn't stop her tears from flowing again. She covered her mouth with a tissue, crying helplessly, "You're all bullying us. Please, sister-in-law, don't be upset. I can't stand to see women cry. Sister-in-law, I can vouch for the fact that Zhu Zhilin, indeed had some urgent matters and couldn't come. As for the incident with your son's stomach, that's on me. Winning the competition made the kid happy, so I thought we'd go out to celebrate." The child agreed. "We had an all-you-can-eat seafood meal, and the child's eyes were bigger than his stomach. I don't know what came over him, he was happy at first, then suddenly he stopped eating and started crying. I asked him, but he refused to say anything. He saw the table next to us drinking alcohol and fetched 2 bottles. Well, you know, we're all men, is there anything that alcohol can't fix? So, I, had a couple of drinks with him." The man looked embarrassed and scratched his head. "Sister-in-law, if you need to blame someone, blame me. I didn't take proper care of the child, and he fell ill. The medical expenses are on me. Please calm down, but don't blame Zhu Zhilin. He really..." Jiang Qin couldn't listen anymore. She lowered her head and waved her hand weakly. "Enough, don't say more. Leave." The next day, Jiang Qin left her work behind and rushed to Zhu Zhilin's parents' house. Before this, Jiang Qin had sworn that she would never see Zhu Zhilin again in her life, except by chance on the street. However, Zhu Zhilin's recent reckless actions had infuriated her to the point that she had to confront him. She wanted to ask him whether he was still human, how he could deceive his son again, and what his true intentions were. Jiang Qin was furious when she arrived at their doorstep. She started wildly kicking the door but received no response. Seeing some bricks in the corridor, she picked one up and began to smash the door. After a while of smashing, nobody opened the door, but the loud noise attracted neighbors' attention. People in the neighborhood recognized Jiang Qin and began discussing the situation. Just then, Zhu Zhilin's mother came back, carrying a lunchbox. She saw her former daughter-in-law aggressively smashing their door with a brick and the door already pockmarked. Trembling, she said, "Jiang Qin, what are you doing?" Hearing her former mother-in-law's voice, Jiang Qin temporarily stopped and turned to look at her. She couldn't help but notice that her former mother-in-law appeared to have aged significantly. Considering that Jiang Qin and Zhu Zhilin had only been divorced for half a year, she couldn't understand why her appearance had changed so drastically. Her hair, which used to be glossy black, now looked as if it had been covered in ash and had turned completely gray. Her figure had also become noticeably thinner. Although Jiang Qin's relationship with Zhu Zhilin's mother had never been very close, she felt that there was no deep-seated hatred between them. She didn't want to vent her anger on her. She dropped the brick, coldly asking, "Where's Zhu Zhilin?" Zhu Zhilin's mother hesitated for a moment and glanced around at the neighbors. She smiled hesitantly, "Well, Jiang Qin, why don't we go inside and talk? I'll open the door." As she retrieved her keys to unlock the door, she told the crowd, "There's no need to worry, everyone can disperse now." Upon entering the house, an unpleasant smell of Chinese medicine assaulted Jiang Qin's senses. The house was empty, with the familiar lights and fish tank nowhere to be seen. It looked entirely different from what Jiang Qin remembered about her in-laws' house. Zhu's mother offered Jiang Qin a seat, poured tea for her, and washed some fruit, explaining that she had no idea Jiang Qin was coming today, so she hadn't prepared anything. All they had were a couple of dried apples, a bit wrinkled but still edible. Jiang Qin ran her finger across the coffee table, finding it covered in dust. She felt stifled, smelling the Chinese medicine, and her surroundings left her feeling a sense of discomfort. "Where's Zhu Zhilin?" she asked. "He hasn't been at home for half a month. He's in the hospital." "In the hospital?" Jiang Qin was surprised. "Yes, he has liver cancer. He's undergoing chemotherapy from time to time, and—" "Jiang Qin, I'm sorry, Zhu Zhilin didn't want to miss the competition, but his health just won't allow it. He used to weigh 180 pounds, and now he's skin and bones." During this time, he was longing to see his son, often staring at his pictures on the phone, but when I told him, he would scare his child with his current condition. I don't think he's willing to do that. Zhu's mother couldn't continue and tears welled up in her eyes. Jiang Qin was in a daze. Her head was a jumble, and her anger, which had been boiling earlier, had subsided completely. "When did this happen?" Jiang Qin asked. "It was only 2 months after you two divorced that he was diagnosed. I guess it's karma. Before the divorce, he often told me about feeling unwell in various ways, like stomachaches and more. There was one time he was in such pain that he was sweating, and I asked him to get a checkup. But he refused, blaming it on excessive drinking and said he just needed some pain relievers. Later on, it was the woman he was with who forced him to get a checkup, and that's when they discovered the liver cancer." Suddenly, Jiang Qin remembered the first time their son was stood up by his father. Could it be? Zhu's mother seemed to sense Jiang Qin's thoughts and said with a choked voice, "I know about what happened that time." Zhu Zhilin heard he could see his child, and he was so happy he couldn't sleep all night. But the next day, he suddenly experienced acute abdominal pain, which led to shock and a hospitalization. "At the time, I didn't know about your arrangement to see your child and was afraid the phone would disturb his rest, so I turned it off. When I found out about this, I was desperate to explain to you and your child, but Zhu Zhilin insisted on not allowing it. He said it would be better if he didn't meet your child. The child hadn't seen him for a long time, and he would eventually forget about him. If he appeared in such a terrible condition, it would be a burden for the child." Walking out of Zhu Zhilin's family's home, Jiang Qin felt lost and her mind was a mess. Initially, she had wished for Zhu Zhilin to die as soon as possible, and she had wanted him to experience the most painful death imaginable. But at this moment, she couldn't find any joy in that thought. On the contrary, in the presence of that elderly woman with graying hair, she inexplicably shed tears. Because of that woman's words, she had touched the most vulnerable part of Jiang Qin's heart. Zhu's mother said, "In those days, you two used to argue constantly. He had problems he didn't tell you about, and you didn't ask. You two just held grudges against each other, and eventually, when someone else outside the marriage showed him concern and tempted him, he was drawn to it. After being with her, he realized it was just like any other relationship, filled with ups and downs. Love is like that, isn't it? No matter how passionate it may be, it comes down to daily life. He told me several times before that, if he knew he would have had a chance to be with you, he would not have let his child be a burden, but he couldn't bring himself to turn back and look for you. He had to persist in making do with her. Later, he got sick, and as soon as the report came out, she packed up and left. Jiang Qin could detect a hint of reproach toward her son's fickleness and frustration with his ex-wife in Zhu's mother's words. As a wife, she hadn't cared about her husband's health, and he was in pain, tired, and taking painkillers in her presence. When she saw it, she pretended not to see. In fact, she did care about him, but she also hated his indifference to her, so she didn't want to show too much concern as a form of revenge. Perhaps from that time, their hearts had drifted apart, and this distance was destined to lead them on separate paths. Then Zhu's mother said a sentence that brought tears to Jiang Qin's eyes directly. She said, "Some things are simply wrong, no matter how you look at them. No matter how much you two fought before, he cheated, and that was wrong. We don't blame you for not allowing Zhu Zhilin to see his child, but we ask you to be more tolerant when Zhu Zhilin sends someone to accompany the child. Please don't blame Zhu Zhilin, okay?" Jiang Qin left with red-rimmed eyes. She had come with anger, but ended up retreating. It seemed like she had lost her armor, and she felt lighter without it. The next day, she went to the hospital to check on Zhu Zhilin's condition, and it was indeed as her mother-in-law had described, very grim. She leaned against the wall, watching her emaciated ex-husband from a distance, and felt an indescribable mixture of emotions. She hadn't completely let go of her resentment towards him. As her mother-in-law said, some things were just wrong. No matter how you approach the issues in a marriage, infidelity was just wrong. Using one mistake to correct another was only adding to the wrongs. However, regarding the 2 times he had let their son down, she decided to forgive him. He couldn't be the father they needed, but at the very least, he didn't want to be a burden. He preferred her to misunderstand, remain silent, and not question him. This was quite a manly way to handle it. But Jiang Qin had changed her mind. Before, it was she who didn't allow Zhu Zhilin to see their son. Now, she had decided to take her son to see him. Zhu Zhilin had visitation rights, and their son had the right to know. These were 2 rights inherent to the relationship between father and son, and no one had the authority to deprive them. Jiang Qin also realized something important: the greatest harm between people, be it between couples or parent and child, was indifference. For their son, his father not loving or caring for him, and not even paying attention to him, was more hurtful than finding out his father was seriously ill. So, starting now, Jiang Qin wanted to make amends for not allowing her ex-husband to see their son. Not for the sake of reconciliation, but to ensure neither of them had regrets in life. They had been husband and wife in this lifetime, and whether they loved each other or not in the next, they would never meet again. So, she wanted to cherish what they had left.